Shabbat Shalom. When I think about the highlights of the Passover story, one of the most powerful lines that we recall is, "Let my people go." This is a moment of affirmation where Moses, the leader of the Israelites, will no longer capitulate to Pharaoh. Rather, he demands, "Let my people go." As Alex told us, and as we know from our own experiences, not only were we freed, but that moment of going from slavery to freedom, from degradation to redemption, became one of the most important narratives to us as Jews. That despite a situation at any given moment, we will hold out hope that things will be better, that freedom will come, that we will move forward. But the question is, to where? When Moses said, "Let my people go," is that all that God was commanding? Was there a next step in that direction? Yes. The verse that we read this morning actually had 3 parts. Part 1, God told Moses to say to Pharaoh. Part 2, "Let my people go." Part 3, "So that they may worship me." Let my people go so that they may worship me. Today, I want to explore the 3rd part of this sentence. Who is to be worshiped? God. You see, being free from slavery doesn't mean that we were to just run amok. Not at all. In fact, being Jewish meant and means that there is a system of ethical and ritual obligations that help give us a framework to live our lives, to shape them into meaningful moments, not just fluttering by each day. So here is what I would like to explore this morning. What does it mean to worship God, and what does God demand of us? What would God say about our behavior today? Are we living up to our end of the bargain? And if not, what can we do about it? So what does it mean to worship God? What does God demand of us? At first blush, this may seem easy. How do we worship God? By acting religious. And what might qualify as religious? Keeping kosher, observing Shabbat, daily prayer, and more. Yes, these are all ways of worshiping God, and ways that I believe can and should be taken seriously as we are fully integrated into the modern 21st century. But I don't think we should stop there. Though as we move forward, it doesn't mean rejecting those either. We hold on to those, and we also go one step further to ethical observances. Yes, worshiping God involves relationships with people. And in fact, this goes back to the Tanakh as well, where the prophet Micah shares, what does God require of you? To act justly, to love kindness, and to walk humbly with God. What do these 3 phrases mean? I imagine if I stopped and opened this up for conversation, there would be many opinions in the room, and I encourage you to discuss it at Kiddush. But since we don't have all morning, let me go on. Let me share a rabbinic opinion on what these 3 sentences mean. To act justly means to act in accordance with the principles of justice. To love kindness, let your actions be guided by principles of loving kindness. And here is where it is fascinating. To walk humbly with God, the rabbis teach, means specifically to assist needy families at their funerals and weddings by giving humbly and in private. Let's stop here for a moment to think about what this means. Okay, to act justly means to follow the tenets of justice. That makes sense. To love kindness means to be guided by such principles. But being humble? This is a clear example. Assist those who need it throughout their life cycle moments. Why? Because these are the moments where a community should be bound together, where we can be responsible for one another. Further, our rabbis taught that deeds of loving kindness are superior to charity in 3 respects. Not that charity isn't important. But charity can only be accomplished with money. But deeds of loving kindness is both personal involvement and money. Charity can only be given to the poor, but deeds of loving kindness can be done to rich and poor. Charity only applies to the living, but deeds of loving kindness applies to both the living and the dead. So where do we see these ideas? These ideas from Micah. This idea that we must worship God by caring deeply about others. Where do we see these played out in our midst? I am sure that each of us have examples of people we know who have displayed acts of kindness and love to others. This week is the 10th yahrzeit of my grandmother, Pearl Poneman Ain, who would have been 102 if she were still alive. My grandmother was a brilliant, kind, and gentle woman. She graduated Columbia University Law School in 1937, and during her life helped countless numbers of people, and was even inducted to argue in front of the Supreme Court, the United States Supreme Court. But the story that I remember about my grandmother is not all of her legal accomplishments or even all of her kids' and grandkids' successes, but that once in the 1970s, she happened to meet a Japanese woman who had recently moved to this country and didn't know English. My grandmother invited her into her home, and they sat each week at my grandparents' dining room table as my Aunt Alice would come home and do her homework, and my grandmother taught her English. This act of giving her the skill not just to survive, but to thrive in the world is what it means to live and act with loving kindness. It means to recognize the potential in each person, and in doing so, we are serving God. So this brings us to our next question. What would God say about our behavior today? Are we acting with justice and kindness? Are we demonstrating humility in our interactions with others? What do you think the intent of the verse was, especially as it was given immediately after being freed from bondage and religious persecution? To be honest, I think God would be conflicted. As a follow-up to Alex's sermon and in light of the news, I would be derelict in my rabbinic duty if I didn't focus for a moment on President Trump's executive order from last Saturday night, temporarily placing a ban on entry to individuals from 7 distinct countries. Not only has this been something the world has been speaking out about, but this united the Jewish world. You don't see anything uniting the Jewish world. And yet, from the halls of Yeshiva University to the Jewish Theological Seminary, to statements from rabbis of all denominations and to the street, we see that there has been a rejection of this executive order because of the Jewish obligation to love the stranger. As Rabbi David Wolpe, one of the top rabbis in this country, wrote this week, every country has a right to boundaries and borders and interests and anxieties. There is evil in this world, and American Jews have the obligation to name it and be vigilant against its encroachment to this country. Jews know that jihadist Islam is coming to us first, and that it is far harder to wipe out an ideology than an army. And many refugees, even well-intentioned ones, arrive from parts of the world infected with the virus of anti-Semitism. And so American Jews have every cause to be vigilant. Yet, every crisis requires us to be informed, requires that though we are informed by fear, we cannot be controlled by panic. Judaism's greatest gift to the world was the idea that all human beings are created in the image of God, and as Rabbi Wolpe states, to see people fleeing parents, children, grandparents, to simply say we will not take them is a betrayal of that gift. And as Chancellor Eisen of JTS said this week, let us be clear, there is no religious obligation, there is no way to worship God more central to Judaism than the protection of strangers. You shall not wrong a stranger or oppress him, for you were strangers in the land of Egypt, we read in the book of Exodus. According to the rabbis of the Talmud, the Torah admonishes us no fewer than 36 times to treat those who were born all over the world with fairness and compassion. No other commandment is repeated so often. And finally, we must listen to the moral voice of Rabbi Simson Raphael Hirsch, whose Chumash we used to use here in this synagogue. The degree of justice in a land is measured not so much by the rights accorded to the native-born inhabitants, to the rich or people who have, at any rate, representatives or connections to look after their interests, but by what justice is meted out to the completely unprotected stranger, Hirsch says. At this pressing time, we hope to inspire our community to let justice well up as waters and righteousness as a mighty stream, as we read from Amos. There are so many things that we can ask ourselves. Are we living up to God's demands? Are we acting the way we should? Here is the good news. As Jews, as members of humanity, we have a chance each day to do tshuva, to do repentance if we don't like what we see. We just entered the new month of February in the Gregorian calendar, and the month of Shvat in the Jewish calendar. And so, with a new month comes the opportunity to ask, what resolutions will we make? How will we be better family members? How will we be better citizens? Will we focus on our relationships? Will we focus on the environment with Tu B'Shvat coming? Will we focus on our Jewish observance? Are we doing well in the areas of ethics, but we've been a little lax in observing God with religious observance? Let my people go so that they will serve me. Each of us has the luxury of being free, free to love, free to practice the religion of our choosing, free to work, free to learn, free to speak, free to travel. It doesn't mean that we don't each have our moments of feeling trapped, but it means we can see the light, we have hope that things will be better. But with that freedom comes a responsibility to serve God with all of our heart, all of our soul, and all of our might, and to do so in a way that demonstrates that we deserve to be free. So as we celebrate Shabbat this morning, as we celebrate Alex becoming a bar mitzvah, and then prepare to enter a new week, let us contemplate what it means to have been let go. Let us wonder, are we serving God the way we should be? And if not, how will we do better? Shabbat Shalom.